Imagine surveying 10,000 students about their textbook costs, spending thousands of dollars to do it, only to find out your results are completely, statistically useless. Why? Well, the answer is simple, but it literally trips up researchers all the time. Bad sampling ruins good intentions. You can have all the data in the world, but if you don't know how to properly categorize, visualize, and collect it, your conclusions are going to be totally invalid.
So, let's dive right into this. Today, we're going through a masterclass explainer on the absolute fundamental rules of statistics, data, sampling, and the natural variation in that data. By the end of this lecture, you'll master 5 crucial concepts. We'll decode data types, figure out how to accurately visualize your data, learn the art of sampling, go over common sampling methods, and finally, learn how to easily spot bias and errors.
Section 1. Decoding data types, or how we go about categorizing the world.
Okay, so every piece of data you'll ever encounter basically falls into one of 2 major camps. First up, qualitative data. This is when we categorize or describe attributes using words or letters. Think hair color, blood types, or the street you live on. You obviously can't calculate an average blood type, right? It just doesn't make mathematical sense. On the flip side, we have quantitative data, which is always numbers. It's the result of actively counting or measuring things, like the cash in your wallet, your resting pulse rate, or the total population of your town.
Now, what's really interesting is how we break quantitative data down even further into discrete and continuous data. You're probably wondering what exactly is the difference. It all comes down to whether you're counting or measuring. Discrete data is counted. It only takes on certain specific numerical values. So if you're buying cans of soup at the grocery store or counting the books in your backpack, you're counting whole items, 1, 2, 3 cans. You can't exactly buy 2.4 cans of soup. Continuous data, though, is measured, meaning it includes fractions and decimals. If you actually weigh that backpack, it might be 6.2 pounds. The exact ounces of soup inside those cans, that is continuous data.
Let's test this out with a really quick scenario. If you sample a few local gyms and find they have 12, 15, and 20 exercise machines, is that discrete or continuous data? Take a second to think about it. Well, you're counting whole machines. You don't have half a treadmill, right? Therefore, it's quantitative discrete data.
Section 2. Visualizing your data and choosing valid charts.
Once you actually have your data in hand, you need a way to show it to the world. If you're working with qualitative categorical data, your brain might immediately jump to a pie chart. And pie charts are fantastic, but they have one strict mathematical rule. They only work when your categories perfectly sum up to exactly 100%. For instance, imagine a university population split perfectly into 25% increments across freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Every single person is perfectly accounted for.
But let's look at a totally different scenario. What happens if your percentages add up to more than 100% because people are allowed to select more than one category? Or what if you have missing data, like an other or unknown category where people just decline to respond? In those situations, a pie chart is completely mathematically invalid. You have to use a bar graph instead. Bar graphs let you display those frequencies and percentages accurately, even when the totals don't neatly add up to 100.
But wait, this next part is a really important point. A standard bar graph can sometimes look incredibly messy and hard to read if the bars are just arranged alphabetically, jumping up and down all over the place. To fix this, statisticians use what's called a Pareto chart. This brilliantly shows how one simple change creates massive clarity. A Pareto chart is simply a bar graph where the bars are sorted from the largest category down to the smallest. Almost instantly, your brain knows exactly what the most and least frequent data points are, without having to scan back and forth.
Section 3. The art of sampling and gathering subsets.
So, gathering information about an entire population, say every single person in your entire country, is usually way too expensive or literally impossible. Instead, we use a sample. And the absolute golden rule of statistics is this: your sample must have the exact same characteristics as the population it's trying to represent.
Now, a super common point of confusion for students learning this is, why can't I just ask my friends? Or stand outside a library and ask the first 20 people I see? Well, that's called convenient sampling. It relies on results that are just readily available. And sure, it's really easy, but it produces highly biased, wildly inaccurate results. Think about it. If you stand outside a science library, you're mostly surveying science students, completely ignoring the rest of the campus population.
Section 4. Common sampling methods and mathematical randomness. To completely avoid that bias, statisticians rely on mathematical methods of random sampling.
This ensures every member of a population has an equal chance of being selected right from the start. The easiest one to grasp is simple random sampling. Let's make this a bit easier with a real-life example. Suppose a student named Lisa wants to form a 4-person study group out of her 31-person class. She could just put everyone's name in a hat and pull 4 out. Or, to be a bit more professional, she could assign every student a 2-digit ID number, say from 00 to 30. Then, she uses a random number generator to spit out numbers and picks the students whose IDs match. In this scenario, every single possible combination of students has an equally likely chance of being chosen.
Now pay really close attention to this next distinction, because this is where people constantly get mixed up. What exactly is the difference between a stratified sample and a cluster sample? Well, in a stratified sample, you divide the population into groups, let's say by college department. Then you take a proportionate random sample from every single department. You get a little bit of everyone. But in a cluster sample, while you also divide the population into groups or departments, you randomly select just a few whole departments. Then you survey every single person inside those selected departments. The departments you didn't pick, they aren't surveyed at all.
Another highly efficient method we use is called systematic sampling. Imagine you're holding a giant phone book with 20,000 listings, and you need a sample of 400. You randomly pick a starting point, let's say the 12th name. From there, you just select every 50th name, so number 62, number 112, and so on. It is an incredibly structured, totally random, and easy-to-follow chance process.
Section 5. Spotting bias and errors, or what happens when data goes wrong. Now that we actually know how to properly sample, we need to look at the dark side of data. Why do things go wrong? Well, even with the absolute best mathematical methods, your data can be ruined by falling into common traps. For example, self-selected samples, like call-in radio surveys, pretty much only attract people with extreme opinions. Then there's non-response bias, which happens when a huge chunk of your selected sample simply refuses to participate. We also frequently see undue influence, where a researcher words a question aggressively just to force a specific answer. And of course, the classic, confusing correlation with causality. Just because 2 variables move together definitely doesn't mean one caused the other.
When you're analyzing data, you also have to separate sampling errors from non-sampling errors. A sampling error is a problem with the math or the process itself, like your sample size was just way too small to accurately represent the population. A non-sampling error, however, is a real-world mechanical failure. Think using a defective scale to weigh those backpacks we talked about, or a genuinely broken counting machine.
But here is something absolutely crucial you must accept when studying statistics. Variation is completely natural. Imagine a factory making 16-ounce cans of a beverage. If you randomly pull 8 cans off that line and measure them super precisely, you might get 15.8 ounces, 16.1, 15.9, 16.0. They are definitely not all going to be exactly 16.0 ounces. And that slight variation in the data, it's completely normal and natural.
And this brings us to a really profound truth from our source material. In reality, a sample will never be exactly representative of the population, so there will always be some sampling error. If 2 different students use perfect random sampling methods to study sleep habits at their exact same college, their final averages are still going to be slightly different. Neither of them is actually wrong. That variability is just a baked-in fact of statistics. Our job as researchers is to see through that variability and draw the appropriate conclusions. And as a general rule of thumb, the larger your sample size, the smaller that sampling error is going to be.
Let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways to really lock this in. First, always categorize your data correctly. Know if you're counting discrete whole numbers or measuring continuous decimals. Second, chart it correctly. Avoid pie charts if your data doesn't sum exactly to 100%. Third, sample randomly using actual mathematical systems, not just by asking whoever happens to be nearby. And finally, anticipate natural variation and critically evaluate every single study for bias.
Data is an incredibly powerful tool, but really only if you know exactly where it came from. The next time you see some shocking statistic online or in the news, I want you to stop and ask yourself, wait, how did they actually sample that? Armed with these fundamental rules, you can now look at numbers with the skeptical eye of a true statistician. Keep this framework in the back of your mind, because in our next explainer, we're going to take these exact concepts and apply them directly to frequency tables